So guys, welcome back to Ponderings from Palm Coast. I'm Mark Webb. And today I asked my good friend, Rabbi Merrill Shapiro, to come back and visit because there's been a lot of conversation going on about faith-based leadership and goals, objectives, things that are happening. And I'm really excited and want to ask him some questions about how he feels about what's happening. The Jewish community seems to be a big talking point now, anti-Semitism, and things that I think to the layperson, you and me, we may not understand exactly what's happening. So Merrill, thanks for coming back.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's so good. And by the way, I'm loving and appreciating with our sister podcasts, Conversations in American Democracy. And I think that we touch on and get some very robust conversations about things that are happening locally and also further out.
Yeah.
So Merrill, as a practicing rabbi,
Well, retired.
retired, but you do.
Okay, I'm a retired rabbi.
You're
yes.
So as a rabbi who would be presenting or speaking in the synagogue, what are your thoughts about this loosening of government control? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, the Trump administration is aggressively changing the guidelines of the IRS to respond to or go after religious communities who become political, speak about candidates or issues or whatever, which there was the Johnson bill in which restricted churches because they are no tax, they are tax exempt because of this, among other things, this guidelines. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, let's understand the facts. First of all, we're talking about something called the Johnson Amendment to Section 501C of the Internal Revenue Service Code. And that says that those receiving, and doesn't talk about religion, all of those receiving tax exemptions, that is, you can write a check to them and deduct it on your Form 1040 each year. If they get that benefit and they don't have to pay taxes on their own income, they must refrain from engaging in partisan political activity. So, by the way, that's a choice. There are religious organizations who say, I won't take 501c3 status. I will simply speak out, then that's okay. And their donors cannot subtract, they take their taxes, cannot deduct their taxes when their federal taxes.
So, for example, the AU, Americans United,
right,
which is a nonpartisan organization that goes out and educates and fights things, is a 501c3
right,
program.
as is the Christian Coalition, and as the Kidney Foundation and the Heart Fund, they're all 501c3 organizations. So there have been, so now we need to talk about the difference between what's de facto, what happens in fact, and de jure, from the word jury, and what happens in law. And in fact, pastors, I shouldn't say just pastors, but clergy people from the pulpit have been showing their contempt and violating Section 501c3 restrictions all the time. And so I've 10 or 12, there's an IRS form to register a complaint. We've sent it. Nothing ever occurs. Although the Christian Coalition did, for a time in the 1990s, I believe, lose their tax-exempt status. So people who wrote checks to them could not deduct them. And therefore, big incentive to donating to organizations like that. There's also a church in the southern tier of New York that also took out a billboard saying it's sinful to vote for Bill Clinton, and if you do, then God will never forgive you. They lost their tax-exempt status. But generally, there are thousands of complaints against pastors who endorse candidates from the pulpit, and the IRS is underfunded and they're too busy and never really responds, and so they get away from it.
But
of course,
specifically,
we had that happen here in Palm Coast and in Flagler County when, well, I won't use his name and I won't name the church, but he endorsed candidates for school board, Will Furry, Chrissy Chung among them, from the pulpit, and we lodged a complaint. Ultimately, the IRS did respond, which was highly unusual, and responded by saying, it's okay, go ahead,
that's
we'll
true.
give you a pass.
But that, if I understand the most recent conversation coming from the administration, was specifically targeted to religious groups.
Right.
So others that you're talking about
Right.
would or still be covered by?
Yeah, presumably they can now endorse as well. The issue is in the Heart Fund, in the Kidney Foundation, in even the ACLU, nobody stands up and openly speaks to a large crowd the way it happens in houses of worship every
Right.
Saturday, Sunday, or Friday. And so that's the concern about what is said. A great example, or a practical example, arose of a clergy person who felt very strongly that Kamala Harris would be in the next election a wonderful candidate. But along came a donor and said, I want to donate $50,000 to this house of worship, but I don't like Kamala Harris. I want you to endorse Pete Buttigieg. So the pastor then has to make a decision. Will I speak for Pete Buttigieg and get that $50,000 that my house of worship badly needs, or will I stay away from politics altogether? There are pastors who can resist that kind of influence, but there are lots who would say $50,000 would mean an awful lot to my institution.
Yeah, especially when many of those house of worships support so many needed things in their community.
Right.
It is, and I think is going to become a central source of assistance, whether it's a food bank or homeless or whatever,
Yeah.
with the Trump administration cutting back and then the state following suit, that donorship and support is like that. So in your case, how would that be a positive to the liberals that are going to church and going to faith-based and see, because I'm having conversations where it's negative, 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 it's going to be terrible, and I always try, as you guys know, I always try to look at changes that occur and how they can benefit my causes, my beliefs. Do you see yourself telling a rabbi that now he's free, he's free to stand in front of the group and talk about this candidate or that candidate or this election coming up?
Yeah, so the pastors that I know, the religious leaders I know, are habituated to not speaking about partisan politics. And once you say, yes, you can go ahead, that doesn't change on a dime. And that may take generations to do. And on the other hand, a Democrat may ascend to the White House and say, I rescind that executive order that tells the IRS not to enforce Section 501c3. So it's not. However, there are pastors and there are clergy leaders who are ready to stand up and say, it's immoral to vote for Donald Trump, or it's immoral to vote for Randy Fine, and God will take divine vengeance upon you if you support these people, and so on. There's nothing to stop that. Here's where we turn to, and as I mentioned, our friends, somewhat extremists. Some would call them extremists, some would call them crazy. I suppose they're not mutually exclusive, so they could be crazy extremists. But the members of the Satanic Temple, members of and it's a real place, a real thing, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, now have an opportunity to stand up and do whatever they want as well, and they can endorse candidates or not, or tell you not to vote for someone, and nobody can say boo.
Do you think that there's enough of a community to affect elections and minds of people in the future? I know and do believe that belief, is a powerful element in many people's lives. And I was raised in the Episcopal Church, and belief is to believe in something without question. And so if a leader in that group, a pastor, a rabbi, presents an idea, presents a view, presents a thought, it's strong. It's impactful.
Okay. Yeah. By the way, I would say in the Jewish world, not so much. But okay, because of the difference of the nature of Judaism and Christianity. But yeah, it is strong. But let's go back to quote, and I'm going to misquote Margaret Mead. It just takes a small number of dedicated people and in fact, to change the world. And in fact, the only thing that ever changed the world is a small group of dedicated people.
Yep.
So it has to start somewhere. It takes time, but sometimes over time, headway can be made.
Interesting. And that is true. And again, I'm a layperson when it comes to understanding the Jewish faith, which kind of brings me to another question that I'm pondering. Is we have a representative, Randy Fine, in our 6th district locally, and he is a very vocal Jewish man of faith. And yet he makes
Okay.
he makes comments all the time in which I'm set back to, and I'm curious if there's not a check and balance between the leaders of that community, whoever they may be, and the actions or how someone says, sometimes very hurtful. A lot of people have some strong opinions about him. What are your thoughts being in that community?
There are several, and I am eager not to have Randy Fine or the Jewish community isolated and not talk about, again, how Ron DeSantis' Catholicism encourages him to incarcerate the people in Alcatraz.
Or as he says, I'm going to put on the armor of God,
the Lord, and
right?
so it speaks
as
all
we've
the
heard
time
that.
about. And the same with Rick Scott and his Baptist background and so on, and then turn and kick the the people who are poor, the people who are hungry in the teeth, and there's plenty of negativity to go around. So. In the case of Randy Fine, who is a horrendous person, his activity do not reflect Judaism. But you need to be careful here and not to confuse Judaism with a religion. Judaism is not a religion, and Judaism is not a faith, but rather it's an identity that has components that are religious, but also have national and cultural. And you can test that yourself. I don't know, again, how knowledgeable you are. What do you need to believe to be a Christian? Shall I start that out? Okay. To be a Christian,
it depends on...
I think it depends on which basketball or football game you go to, and someone holds up a sign that says John 3:16.
Yeah.
For God so loved the world that he gave to the world his only Son, that through him we might achieve salvation.
Sure.
If you don't believe that, I don't know that you qualify as a Christian. What do you need to be a Muslim? You need to believe to be a Muslim.
Muhammad.
That Allah is the one God and Muhammad is the prophet of Allah.
Right.
What do you need to believe to be Jewish? some would say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. But the fact of the matter is,
Jesus Christ was not the Messiah.
well, okay.
They're not questioning whether he, the prophet.
That's a different matter. But the fact of the matter is, you don't have to believe anything to be Jewish. If you're born of a Jewish mother, you're Jewish.
there.
And in fact, you might not accept and be part of the religious component of Jewish identity, but be part of the cultural component. That is, you like to live where Jews live, eat the foods that Jews eat, join the clubs or that Jews join, that read the books and that Jews read, and so on. And there's a nationalist component focused on the fact that the Irish come from Ireland, and Australians come from Australia, Mexicans come from Mexico, and Jews ultimately come from the land of Israel. By the way, and the land of Israel, and patriotism related to the land of Israel and that nationalist identity is called Zionism. We might use the word patriotism, but for this particular situation, it's called Zionism. So you can have those cultural and national affinities and have a zero under religion. And I believe, in fact, that Randy Fine, while he presents himself, as do so many politicians, how religious is Donald Trump? I mean, he goes, stands in front of a church, holds up a Bible, and so on. Doesn't that make him religious? Does that make him a good Christian? No. And Randy Fine can wear a kippah and go to the synagogue. By the way, several years ago, he threatened to burn down Temple Beth Shalom in Melbourne, Florida, because they hired an LGBTQ Sunday school teacher. Does that qualify him under the religious? Is he paying attention to his religious component? Not at all. Does he like to eat bagels and lox on Sunday morning? Yes. Does he feel an affinity to the land of Israel? Yes. And that's the way he creates his Jewish identity.
Well, that's so interesting. You're taking me to school here, and I hope the rest of you are paying attention, because I can understand more about the role or the belief or the practice of Judaism as much more and more deeper of a cultural issue, embracing your path and your past.
Yeah.
And we all know about the challenges they've come, not able to really compare that to the Catholics or the Episcopals or whatever.
Let me give you an example. You're an Episcopalian.
I am.
Can you name Can you name some Episcopal foods?
No, there are none.
How about Catholic foods?
Fish on Friday.
How about Baptist foods? How about Presbyterian foods? How about Jewish foods? Can you name Jewish foods? Yeah, that's because Judaism is not a religion. Judaism has that cultural component.
Exactly.
And as an Episcopalian, do you pray for the restoration of your homeland? Or do Presbyterians pray for the restoration of Scotland as their homeland? Do Lutherans pray for the restoration of Germany? No. But we as Jews pray for the restoration of Israel in our eternal homeland, dating back at least 3,000 years.
That's great points.
Yeah. So not quite the same, but go ahead.
No, but I didn't know.
Yeah.
I had no comparison or base other than the perception of what I hear. And that's why I wanted to bring you on today, because when Randy Fine or others speak and claim that their faith, their religion, their culture, their view is antagonistical toward Palestinians, for example, or the Muslims or whatever. It's coming from a much deeper cultural view.
Right. It's a cultural and a national. It has nothing to do with his adherence to the 19th chapter of Leviticus that says, love your neighbor as yourself, for example.
So in the world of Christianity, a pastor, priest would talk to on Sunday about how to behave and how to act and how to do things. That may or may not be part of the conversation in the synagogue?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by the conversation in the synagogue. So, certainly, we would talk about the same thing and what our tradition says and how people should behave and act and what they should take seriously and what not to take seriously. But by the way, because of the difference between a rabbi's relationship to his or her congregation and a pastor, a Christian minister, priest, relationship to their congregation, it's quite different. I often quote the fact that for certain segments of Jewish worship and Jewish prayer, you need a quorum of 10 people. Okay? Now, so if you have 9 of the greatest rabbis of the world in a room, you do not have a quorum. If, however, you have 10 illiterate Jews, you do have a quorum. That is, and here we go back to Exodus chapter 20, all of us, and by tradition, all of our souls, all of the Jews who ever were or will be, were there at the foot of Mount Sinai, and without an intermediary, heard and saw the evidence of God, heard the word of God. So no Jew is any better than any other Jew, including a rabbi.
Interesting.
Yeah. I believe, to a certain extent, and you'll have to inform me of this, whether a person goes to church at an Episcopal church, a Baptist church, a Catholic church, that when they hear a sermon and someone preaches, they say, this is this is the word of God, and I need to pay close attention to this. In a synagogue, a rabbi gives a sermon, and then people ask a lot of questions and say, I'm not sure, I don't agree, and so on. The old joke is that 2 Jews arguing on a street corner represent at least 3 opinions. That everybody has input and everybody's equal, and rabbis are challenged, and we encourage people to ask questions. I don't know how far I want to go. Well, because I love the story of Isidore Rabi, R-A-B-I, a Brooklyn-born Jewish guy who discovered that cells have a magnetic resonance, and ultimately created the science that allowed for MRIs. They took away the word nuclear because it scared people. Nuclear magnetic resonance machines. When he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1947, a reporter asked him, all the kids growing up in your neighborhood when you went to school, they all became doctors and lawyers and business people and engineers. How come you became a scientist? And he said, my mother made me a scientist. He says, how did she do that? He says, all the other kids, when they came home, their mothers asked them, what did you learn in school today? My mother came home. When I came home, my mother turned to me and said, Izzy, did you ask a good question today? And that made him, and so our responsibility is listening to a sermon, and I urge people who listen to my sermons, ask a good question. Ask a good question, and that will take us on the path that we need to be.
Wow, that's interesting.
So I don't know if there's that group, whether you can do that in the Episcopal church, whether you can go to the pastor and question what he says, or the Roman Catholic priest and question what they say, or whether you simply accept.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, not at the...
Yeah, well, that's, by the way, as we well know, Catholics, the pastor the priest stands up and says that abortion is a terrible evil, and a large percentage, I won't quote a number, a large percentage disagree with that and with birth control and so on.
My experience was you would go to church first, and you would listen to the sermon and prayer and tithe, and then you would break from that, and the children would go to Sunday school and learn the Sunday school level basics of religion, and the adults would go to adult Sunday school and sit in there and actually discuss the subjects of the sermon and where it came from and how it was interpreted, because as we know, in any written word, interpretation, which sounds like you guys do it right at the front of, these are the words that men wrote, whether they were apostles or whatever religion, and even in the Muslim religion is the same thing, and then it was open for interpretation discussion. So it does happen. It's just after the fact when people sit and digest how that addresses. But I also know that in the experiences I've had, if there was a parishioner that was struggling or behaving poorly or was not in the pastor's eye, in the preacher's eye, presenting a godlike or a religious or following the teachings there would be an effort to bring that person in. Usually, especially the men's religious group and community is very strong in a lot of the Christian groups, and the men would rally around and help this person who may be abusive with his family, or he may be an alcoholic, or he may be just struggling financially, and they would try to bring, because it's that community of religion, which is what a lot of people are drawn into. People coming together that can speak, get help, and get directed, and counseling, and just a whole plethora of different things that occur. So, wow, you've really taken us to school on the understanding. We had a guest here recently, Al Kramer, who is also a Jew by birth.
Well, okay.
His mom was Jewish, and he made the statement of most of the people in Israel are not practicing Jews.
Are not religious, right?
They're non-religious, but they are culture.
Yeah.
They do have pride in the belief and understanding the struggles, which they should.
Yeah.
If any group has been attacked, to say it blatantly, it would be the Jewish community from the beginning of history. So I can appreciate that. I just don't understand, and wanted to ask you how someone that appears to wear the coat of Judaism in all things and says things that are so just generally distasteful and mean and just shocking, even to his own party, by the way.
Okay, so who was Elmer Gantry? Who was Elmer Gantry?
No idea.
Was outwardly a young kid, I thought, who preached and so on and convinced lots of people, so that he ultimately, by the way, he's the model for so many others, ultimately can become rich and buy a Lamborghini and live in a big house and so on, while poor people are hungry and have no shelter and so on. So there are people of all faiths, leaders of all faiths, who put themselves in the position of leadership in all faiths, who clothe, as you say, clothe themselves in the mantle of religiosity and have no idea what religiosity is.
Oh, and the Christian, we have hundreds of examples of that. The bakers, for one, in North Carolina, that had multiple homes, flew around in jets, and took donations from people that were starving. So,
I have a question.
Please.
How does the American Jewish community react to this thrust toward being a more Christian nation? There are forces now that are trying to make this a more or an official Christian nation.
Right.
How does the Jewish community feel about it?
Well, first of all, Jews, when they came here in large numbers between 1880 and 1920, saw an unwritten covenant with the United States. And they said, and the United States was saying to them, if you will give up your traditional garb, the way you dress and so on, and dress like us, we will help you become wealthy. If you give up your ancient tongue and your language and speak English like we do, we will help make you wealthy. If you will eat in our restaurants, and we talked about food and kosher and that, we will make you wealthy. If you celebrate our holidays like Christmas and Easter and so on, we will make you wealthy and successful. Ultimately, if you assimilate yourselves into American society, then we will make you wealthy. And many of the Jews who came here from 1880 to 1920 did exactly that. And in fact, if you look at their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren compared to what they knew when they got off the boat, they're pretty wealthy, so it worked. However, the forces of assimilation have also made them more and more Christian. And even if they maintain their Judaism, their thought concepts and basic foundational understandings are too much informed by Christianity. So now we have the assimilated masses of Jews, and you have a significantly smaller but more powerful and vocal group, I think, of those who struggle to maintain their Jewish identity. And they, of course, are increasingly alarmed, constantly alarmed, over the attempt to claim that America is a Christian nation, that it was founded on the principles of the so-called Ten Commandments, that everything, I think, and the guy's name is David Barton, you should look him up, but he will declare that every president, of course, the Constitution does not mention God. And the Constitution states that when a president is sworn in, he takes an oath that says, I will defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that they have added, since George Washington, the words, so help me God. That is not true. And it was not true that our founders were all devout Christians. In fact, they were deists, and Thomas Jefferson was notable for not believing any of the supernatural things that are read in the Christian scriptures about Jesus. They did not want, they left religion out for a good reason out of the Constitution, and Jews would like to use that as a bulwark against those attempting to say that we are a Christian nation.
So what if they, it does talk about religion tests.
Yeah.
And it says there shall be no religious test in the Constitution. But what if we got to this point, and it scares me to think, I have no idea where the direction or how things are going to go, Project 2025 and all of this. Could you imagine a census coming out in 2030 that says, are you a citizen? And do you believe in our Lord Jesus Christ?
Right.
As a question on a test to be a citizen. That's not out of the realm of possibility, and there are quite a few groups that feel that that's a direction they would like to see.
Yeah.
Because I don't think a Jewish person would be able to answer the second part.
Right, absolutely not. And so, once again, let's differentiate between de facto, the real facts, and de jure, the law. So, the Constitution says there shall be no religious test. As a requirement to hold office. So anybody of any religion can can achieve an office, elected office in the United States. Can Josh Wheel, who is Muslim, or in New York, in the Mayores, Mondami, who is a Muslim, who is an adherent to Islam, can they get elected? That's in the facts, not the law, but the facts are, they certainly have a hurdle to overcome, and that is the fact that they are not Christians. By the way, there's no such thing as a Judeo-Christian tradition or Judeo-Christian thought, but they sort of get lumped together, and that helps Jewish candidates to get elected. But there are lots of other reasons why Jewish candidates get elected as well. And so there is a religious test in a way that talk to people and see if they would vote for a Muslim, and they absolutely would not. By the way, in the issue that concerns me and schools and parental rights, so-called parental rights in schools, and they argue that parents know their kids better than any other. And so someone undertook a survey and asked these parents, a statistically significant number of parents, would you advocate the use of Arabic numerals in the public schools of our community? And overwhelmingly, the parents said, no, we don't want Arabic numerals in our, our numerals are Arabic.
Right.
Yeah.
You touch on a subject that I wasn't planning on bringing up, but I know that you're very passionate in our local school. On last Friday's free-for-all conversation on the local FM radio station,
WNZF, yeah.
our representative Greco, Sam Greco, was on the phone, and he was talking to our superintendent, and they were talking about the funding of all the vouchers that were going on. And Brian McMillan, who is the observer for our local newspaper, I highly recommend paying attention to him and the things he's doing, flat out asked both of them, there appears to be evidence that people are applying for and getting these $9,000 vouchers and then attending the public school. And what are your thoughts on that? The superintendent admitted that they're tracking over 100 students that may have done that. Sam Gecko says, yeah, there are holes in the laws that we're doing that we're trying to be aware of. But no one said, no, that doesn't happen. And the question of separation of religion and in the school and in the private schools, and I know that you're heavily involved in our school board element. Do you see that there is a conversation or some pressure from the religious or private schools that are growing by leaps and bounds based on this flood of money that parents who they claim know what's best for our students, knows what's best for their children, until, of course, they want to talk about trans or some other element, and the law quickly says, no, you're a parent, you don't have that authority.
Oh, well, there's a difference between having that authority and having expertise. So I looked over here. It is not difficult to discern the products of homeschooling by the fact that they don't know how to hold a pen or a pencil. Okay? And if you watch carefully, you say, why? Because homeschooled kids, and kids often in private schools, are taught by people who are not qualified. Teachers in the public school system of Flagler County and throughout Florida are required to have appropriate college degrees, pass tests, achieve certification, undergo constant supervision and constant honing of their skills, and they are highly skilled educators. What the voucher system says is, we're going to pay you to help you go to a school where the teachers don't necessarily have to have the college degrees. In fact, I once, on behalf of a congregant, tried to find out if this congregant who needed a job could substitute in the public schools, and they said, well, does he have a high school diploma? It says, yeah, doesn't he need to have a high school? He says, no, we could have substitutes without high school diplomas. Leslie Postal of the Orlando Sentinel is a big champion of ours, and wanted to find out more about a series of private schools in the Orlando area, particularly in the Pine Hills section of that. There was one school, she was trying to contact the principal, and it was thwarted at every turn. Until one day she called the office, and somebody in the office said, oh, I'm sorry, he's not available to talk on the phone because he's taking classes at Valencia College. And Leslie said, oh, what's he studying at Valencia College? He's the principal of a large private school. He says he's studying for his AA degree. His associate's degree is 2-year degree. So there are no qualifications, no requirements. Many of these schools, don't have there are all sorts of requirements for schools by the fire department, by the health department, and so on. They don't have to meet any of those. Just we're throwing away money and nobody knows what's happening, including those students taking up seats in public schools. As you pointed out, there are 100 in our county. I can assure you there are many more in other counties.
Oh, yeah. No doubt. Yeah. But their response back was, well, we also provide vouchers to homeschool families and children in which your mom or dad or whoever's teaching you at home doesn't require accreditation, doesn't require education to be able to provide an education. Not addressing the requirement of milestone testing and whatever to show proficiency, while we, the taxpayer, are paying more money than you would imagine
Tons.
to support the freedom of parents to selectively send where their kids school, and the facade, the belief that a private school is going to afford you much better quality education, which in this conversation on Friday was never verified.
Yeah.
There are no data. There's no data proving that.
Well, you know what? That we can even look here at the county's charter school, Imagine School, and its grades are no better than the local public schools, Belterre Elementary, Buddy
Right.
Taylor, and so on. So it's not related to separation of church and state, but Americans United for Separation of Church and State has, in fact, batted this around informally around the table, and we raised the question of what's called perceived valuation. So when I was growing up, the local shoe store was sort of, you had to walk away and you had a window of shoes on one side and a window of shoes on the other side, and you went through the door. So the local, it was called Federal Shoe, was the name, from by friends of ours, the Stromfeld family. They took a pair of shoes and put it in the window on the left side and put a $50 price tag on it. And then they took the same pair of shoes and put it in the window on the right side and put a $75 price tag in it. Well, when people came in at the end of the week or the month, they ultimately discovered they sold more of the $75 shoes than they did of the $50 shoes. Why? Because it had a $75 price tag. People thought it was a better shoe. And so private schools that have fancy tuitions, people say, wow, they're charging, but this must be a good school because it charges fancy tuitions. And the public schools, they're free, so they can't be worth very much, and that the private schools are much better. The truth of the matter is that public schools are damn good. And public schools are the way to go. I will note that in Article 9 of Florida's Constitution, there's a primary obligation of the state to create a single system of universal public of excellent universal public education, free public education, and that it maintain the highest of standards. And we're not doing that. Well, maybe we are doing that, but there are people who are taking money away and sending it to these very substandard private schools.
Well, and the transfer of that wealth, that money, is clearly affecting the quality, the availability of the public schools. Up in Jacksonville recently, they had to lay off exceptional teachers and shutter some of the schools that were in the Jacksonville School District because of loss of income and students. Now we're questioning the student numbers, to how that affects. And the reason I wanted to touch on this is because of the separation of church and state, people argue that a lot of these private schools have the freedom to embed or have conversation with religious components, which you can't. For example, the Ten Commandments, we're seeing that all over the place.
But they're not have the freedom. They are religious schools. 81%. We've got a second scholarship funding organization, but primary scholarship funding organization in this state is the called Step Up for Students. And it provides and needs to provide good statistics. 81% of the funds for vouchers, voucher students, go to private religious schools. And that means that you are paying for Scientology education at Clearwater Christian School. Excuse me, Clearwater, I forgot what it's called. It's in Clearwater. That the Mormons of Flagler County are paying to send kids to Baptist schools that teach that Mormons aren't Christians. The Catholics of our community are paying to send kids to Seventh-day Adventist schools that teach that the Pope is the Antichrist. And the Jews of our community are sending kids to school that teach that Jews are liars, murderers, and satanic. And so that's the mess that has been created by giving in to religious interests that are, in fact, better organized and have louder mouths and speak up more, and so they get it. And that's the reality. Is it good for education? Is it good for the young people? Is it good for our state, our community, our county? No, it is not good. But this is the way politics works, unfortunately.
And it's important, I think, and you guys know that I work hard to try to connect these imaginary dots. It's almost like dominoes, right? One domino falls way over here and nobody hears it, nobody knows it. Then all of a sudden, the dominoes in front of you that you have treasured change. And so these ripple effects of allowing churches to speak to candidates and other political has direct relation on what your kids are getting in school or not getting in school. And people, unfortunately, don't pay that as much attention as we do. And that's kind of why we're here, to try to get you to question for a moment the impact of one thing that's done and how later on you find your kids are not prepared to go to a college that they can't get into anyway because there's no money from the federal government to allow for you public education, because public education from its conception was there to provide for those that couldn't afford those golden schools, the charter schools and those things that the rich could. So this interaction and the connection between the separation and the need to separate religion from our government is touching so many different areas, some of which we're not even aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't necessarily share that opinion, but I have encountered many people in the local chapter here and the local chapter, in particular in Richmond, Virginia, who really saw the lack of separation between church and state as the root of all evil. I don't know that it's the root of all evil, but it certainly is not the way to go. It's not what the founders of our country had in mind. And by the way, in terms of education, they saw an educated electorate as essential to democracy. And if people are ignorant, you made a comment earlier that I didn't call on you. I was going to quote a very wise person by the name of Mark Webb, who said that most people, you said something about most people do not vote. Okay?
Exactly.
And therefore, when you say most people feel this way, I look to statistics and certainly surveys that show that a small majority of Americans cannot find Iowa on a map. And as such, but the nature of democracy, that's the messiness of democracy. And was it Churchill or who said, it's not a good form of government, but it's far better than all the others. And democracy is messy and problematic, but it's clearly the way we need to go.
Right. Well, that is the whole purpose that I started this podcast, to be on this media, because I'm trying to reach the younger community that relies on social media as a source for information. Because wrong or right, it used to blow my mind. You watch Jimmy Kimmel, he goes out on the street and he questions people walking by, and there's a bunch of people that do this, not knowing where Iowa is far lower than what some of these people who don't even know who the president is and doesn't understand or any of that. And education is just so important. So, Merrill, as always, you've taken us to school. You've educated us on Judaism a little bit. I've learned something today. I'm better for it. And that's really the gift that you bring, and others like you, to get people to ponder the world around you, to ask questions like, you were saying. And I did a whole podcast on critical thinking because I think that's been aggressively removed by a lot of the politicians and a lot of the Christian national. I was watching YouTube the other day, and they were at the Baptist convention.
Yeah.
And there was booth after booth of people talking about our Earth is only 6,000 years old,
exactly.
and this is the reason why.
Yeah.
And they had all these scientific proofs on why.
And we're paying for that kind of education that teaches that, by the way.
Well, exactly.
That's the
and so that critical thinking of having a young person or any person to go, I don't know if I believe that question. So it's always so good to have you.
Thank you.
And any final thoughts? What is it on your mind?
Okay, so I am a member of the Free Thought Society that's based in Jacksonville. I don't know if it's the Free Thought Society of Northeastern Florida, whatever. And I said, wait, you're not an atheist or an agnostic, you're a rabbi. We've never had a clergy person or a religious person in our membership. And I said, any organization that has the word thought in its mind is an organization I want to be part of, because I want to go to. So any endeavor that has the word ponder, to think, to question, to ask, to ponder, is something I'd like to be part of, and I congratulate you for giving us the platform in which hopefully we don't have answers, or if I give you an answer to a question, that you leave with 10 other questions because of it, and something to think about and something to ponder. And so I congratulate you for what you're doing as well.
Well, and I think that should be everyone's goal. And unfortunately, we're headed down a road of not being tolerant. And you have to be tolerant and open to differences to even participate in pondering. When you're approached or you have an interaction with someone that is not like-minded, and I am constantly trying to invite and bring people in that have difference of opinion, difference of views, because you can grow. You can expand your understanding and belief. You will have what I like to call that aha moment, of which I had today in your conversations about Judaism and the belief that I didn't know. And it's going to force me to get smarter, or at least look into it.
Force you to think. The highest compliment I get for sermons is not, I enjoyed your sermon, I thought it was great, and so on. It says, your sermon made me think.
Exactly.
And people are not thinking these days, and people do need to think. And again, think and ponder, and that's why I congratulate you for what you're doing.
Well, thank you for that. And you're always welcome back.
Thank you.
As I've said to many of my guests, the conversation we have today is nowhere near the conversation we need to have a week, 2 weeks, or even a month from now, because I don't think anybody can predict what's behind the next door, what's the next curveball that's coming.
Right.
So guys, as Rabbi Merrill Shapiro is saying, get out there and think, broaden yourself, ponder questions, and participate. You have to participate. You're going to hear me attempt to bring in more people like I did with the 5051, and there's other groups that provide avenues for you to get off the couch. The biggest fear I have is that we will experience what has happened over and over again in history, where slowly things occur and change and you're not aware of it until you are. It's happened in Germany, it's happened in Venezuela, it's happened in many other countries in which the citizens didn't pay attention, didn't understand what was happening, and I hate to use this scenario. We're all frogs in a big pot, and they're cranking the temperature up a little at a time and you don't notice the fact that we're being cooked. So with that, take that. Thank you so much for coming and participating. Merrill, thank you again.
And thank you.
And guys, remember, Conversations in American Democracy, a great podcast if you want to hear dialogue like this, but from many different people thinking about things. And as always, if you're in Palm Coast, pay attention to what's happening with our city council. There's a lot of town hall meetings. Please show up. It's your city. It's your voice. It's your money. Get active. Participate. And with that, I'll catch you next time. Thanks for stopping by.